stuff, I think. So what we're going to do this evening is we've got an hour and a half. We will definitely finish within the 90 minutes. That's my promise to you. We're going to hear from myself and Andy to talk a little bit about business planning principles, very broadly, very briefly, in relation to community-led housing. And we're going to hear from Mark and Anne-Helene, who have very generously offered to come and talk to us about lending possibilities through Triodos Bank and CAF Venturesome, which is a really good. I love this face-to-face offer. I think it's really, really useful to have the opportunity to challenge and question and clarify, because I think that's what we all need, is just to be able to get to the nitty-gritty of what we need to be talking about when we're talking about developing community-led homes projects. So I think that's me. Introductions done. Has anybody got any questions? Is everybody in the right room? Is that what you're all expecting to hear this evening? Yes, good. This is encouraging. So I'm going to just start with a really quick, and I apologise, this is slides based, but it's slides based so that I can circulate the information afterwards and you don't have to worry too much about jotting things down. I'm going to just whiz through a quick introduction to what I mean by business planning and where you can get help from organisations who can help you think this through with community-led housing in mind. So I'm just going to pull up my slides. Not there. Sorry, it was hiding, but I found it now. Sorry, it won't let me see the button that I need. Where's it gone? Oh dear. Apologies, I've got the bar that's telling me all of my Zoom options right across the bit where it says slideshow at the top of the page. Any suggestions? Perhaps if I minimise that slightly. There we go. Do that. Beginning. There we are. We're away. Sorry about that. Is everybody still with us? Great. Okay. So so my job here really is just to tell you that writing a business plan is not rocket science, and that there are lots of good places to get advice and support as you're approaching it. But you do need one, and you need one for all sorts of reasons, not least to talk to funders in an intelligent way about what you're doing and why you're doing it. The basics of business planning are, just to show project viability. That's the bottom line. And we'll hear from Mark and Anne-Helene later about what they understand by that, and we will also explore that a little bit in a bit more detail with Andy when we're looking at what you actually need to know in order to write this business plan. It's not the writing of the business plan that's challenging, it's gathering the stuff you need to put into it and to make sure that it's credible and that it works, that what you're saying is true. So that's where we're starting from. Included in my slides, just this 3 examples of places where you can go to get advice on writing a decent business plan. If you follow any of these links, you'll come across all the words that you would expect to see about visions and missions and executive summaries and budgets and financial plans and all of those bits and pieces that make up your business plan. If what you want is a template or a structure, there are hundreds of them out there. These are 3 that I would trust to support you reasonably well. And you need to be fairly disciplined about including all the information that is proposed for you to put in there. But as I say, that's just the mechanics of getting it written down. The interesting part is working out what you're going to say. So there are 2 main parts to any business plan, and again, massively oversimplifying what's going on here. But there's the first part is you describing what you're going to do. You need to put your project in some sort of context, and you need to explore in writing why you're doing what you're doing and set out what your aim is. Why have you decided to do a housing project in your community? What evidence do you have that this is the right thing to do? What evidence do you have that you've chosen the right mix, or that you're asking the right people, for good information? How are you organised? What sort of structure you choose to be? All of these things need to be explored before you get into really writing the business plan and committing yourselves to sort of financial speculation, because really, by answering these questions, you're doing the groundwork for all of that heavy lifting you've got to do later. The kind of $1 million questions is in the middle there. It's about who's going to be doing the bulk of the delivery. If it's a self-guided project and the community group are taking the lion's share of the responsibility, then you really need to be confident that you can find out, with support from others, that you can buy in the relevant expertise that you need to make sure that your plans, your structure, your finance, all of that needs to be robust and backed up by people who can help you to do that. There are such people, and it is very possible to do. But the other main delivery option would be to be working closely in partnership with a registered provider or housing association. And that would mean that you just have to look at things slightly differently. I think Andy's going to go into a bit of that later on. But essentially, the business plan needs to describe really clearly to a person who wouldn't necessarily know very much about community-led housing, how you're going to manage large sums of money over a long period of time and make sure that they function properly and do what you say they will do. So all of this stuff is going to be in the written part of your plan. And then there's the numbers part of your plan, a sort of slightly crass distinction, but essentially what we're saying is you've got to describe what you're going to do in words and be convincing. It's not War and Peace, but it's got to be good narrative. And what the narrative is doing is explaining how your numbers are going to stack up. The numbers need to be credible. So you should take good advice. You should make sure that you're not just putting your finger in the air and guessing, that you're not just going on something that you learned 5 years ago in conversation with a potential lender, and that you're able to commit to sensible assertions about the way your project stacks up in terms of tenure, in terms of cross-subsidy. All of those things come into the mix when you're looking at the numbers. There's a lot going on here, and as I say, this is just a romp through the sorts of things one needs to be considering as you're preparing the information to go in here. 2 things just to draw out specifically, and I think we'll hear this from everybody else who's going to speak tonight, but it's really, really important that you challenge your own assumptions, that you stress test, and that you explore what happens if things go wrong, or if your circumstances around you change, if your build costs go up for some reason, or if the classic example of interest rates changing, you've got a profile which is no longer true. So it's important to keep a contingency budget available to you, and your lenders, your grant funders, the people you're working with to make these things possible will talk to you about what they expect to see in those terms, and make sure that the work that the numbers that you're relying on for your own information and that they're relying on to support you are based on something credible, sensible, and so on. So I'm just going to hand over to Andy, who's got a few more slides, just 3 more here, I think, and then we'll get into the meat of the lending conversation. I'll take a few questions when Andy's done this next bit.
Great, thanks, Fran. So we're imagining here that you might be a group who are thinking of self-delivering a project, in which case you're fortunate enough to have got a lead on a site and you're wondering what to do about it. And essentially it breaks down into sort of 2 steps. The first one is that you need to test the site to find out whether or not it's a liability or it's going to be actually developable. So you obtain the landowner's permission and you hire a professional team, architect and quantity surveyor, to carry out all the usual site surveys, and a solicitor to carry out legal searches, so that you can actually get some information which has got to be really specific to that site, so that you've taken the first step to seeing what it's going to actually look like. And after the ground surveys have been done, the architect will then be able to suggest how the homes might be laid out on a site, and then produce not a very detailed but just an indicative layout for the site, and enough information for the quantity surveyor to extract some costs, which again are indicative, but at least they're actually related to a specific opportunity. And then that information can be passed to somebody perhaps from a housing association, perhaps from somebody working with one of the hubs and so on, who can run the figures through viability software, along with a few other things like the mix of tenures that you think you would like to see, and contract values and that sort of thing, and estimated grant levels and those sorts of things, interest rates. And it all feeds through the software, and it basically tells you what you can afford to pay in terms of land value, and gives you an idea of how much capital grant you need per unit and so on. So once you've done that and it all starts to look good, we'll move on to the next slide. Thanks, Ron.
I'm trying.
Thank you. You can then start to actually negotiate the land value with the owner and firm that up, and hopefully secure some form of legal agreement, which would buy you time to then obtain further funding to carry out more detailed work and have a go at the planning application. So that's commonly done through an option agreement or a conditional contract. So then you can actually hopefully get as far as the planning application, and have pretty detailed costs which you can discuss with Homes England in terms of looking at how much grant is required to make the scheme viable, and hopefully line up lending with the lenders that you may be talking to. And all of that, what you're looking at essentially is a kind of a continuous process of updating what's going into the spreadsheet, and then the business plan is always going to be current. So it's not something which you do as a one-off activity. It's something which you start off with available information, and then you're acquiring more and more accurate information as you go along, and so the business plan becomes more and more accurate. So then the final third slide, thanks Fran. So if you don't happen to be wanting to actually take that level of responsibility as a community group, there are other options open to you. We'll be talking about those in one of the forthcoming workshops. But here we're looking at a situation where, okay, developing yourselves is going to be too time consuming, and it's a much better option for you to go into partnership with a housing association, in which case this is just to say that you'll still want to have a business plan, because it's a publicity tool as well for you to be able to pass to anybody so that they can understand what's going on. You could have it on your website and the community can have a look at it and so on. So if you've gone into a partnership with a housing association, the text of the business plan is going to be very similar, but you'll be getting the financial figures from the housing association, because they'll be taking responsibility, depending on what the type of partnership is, but in all likelihood, they'll be taking responsibility for all the pre-development exploratory work, and working up the values in the spreadsheet, and confirming viability, and negotiating with lenders and with Homes England over grant and so on. And so they'll be able to help you by providing the figures that they're generating through their investigations, and you can quote those in your business plan, because your business plan will be saying, hey, we're actually in partnership here with such and such a housing association. This is how the partnership works, and here are the figures at the current moment in time. And again, you'll be updating things if things change. That's it from me.
Thanks very much, Andy. I'm going to get rid of that for the moment. Okie dokie. That's great. Well, does anybody have any questions immediately about business planning specifically? I can see, I've lost it at the moment, but I can see that Lorraine put a question in about costs on retrofitting, I think it was. Is that right, Lorraine? I'm not sure that we can deal with that immediately, but we could perhaps come back to that a bit later on and see what people have got to say about that. Fiona? Oh, Becky wants to say something. Right, hold on a second. Go on.
Is that okay?
Yes.
So as I understand it, you need a business plan to register with the FCA. But if you don't have a site in mind, what you've been saying about business planning, it kind of assumes you've got a site and a project in mind. So can you have an initial business plan that simply says what your aspirations as a group are?
Absolutely.
Yes, I think I'll let Andy answer this in a bit more detail, but I think we've discussed the idea of a business plan being very much an iterative process, and I think you'll hear that from the funders as well. Is there something else you wanted to add at this point, Andy?
I was just wondering what you were saying there, Becky. You need a business plan to register with the FCA, as in the Financial Conduct Authority, you mean?
Yeah, don't you need that to get, you know, if you want to be a community benefits society, going through those ropes? No?
No. You can register your society. They don't ask for business plans. That's something which would come at some point. But also, incorporating is not necessarily. It might be crystal clear what type of company you want to be, but you don't have to rush that. You know, it's worth reflecting a little bit.
Okay, thanks.
Becky, I think what they require for you to register is a constitution. So you have to have a constitution, but not a business plan, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Nick, have you got something to chip in?
Yeah, I was just going to add, with the FCA as well, there are loose questions that they ask on their application form for a CBS. So it's kind of, what are you going to be doing, things like that. It's not anything like a business plan. It's more kind of a loose, what's the intention of the organisation. So it's probably a bit more stringent than a company, but nothing like a business plan for that.
Okay, does that help you, Becky, at this point? Great. Okay. Right, well, I'm going to hand over to Anne-Helene now, who has kindly made a presentation about their community-led housing fund held at CAF Venturesome. And it's a great opportunity to explore, well, what I've asked Anne-Helene to do is to tell us what they need from us, really, so that we can have a good conversation with them about what's possible, and so that we're more likely to build this positive relationship with funders in general, but funders in specific here as well, so that we can be honest about what we're trying to achieve, and you know, the companies that we've got represented this evening are how should I put this, ethically aligned with much of what goes on in community-led housing. So I think we really want to speak the right language and make sure that we're answering the right questions. So I won't go on, Anne-Helene. I'm sure you've got plenty that you want to say for yourself. I'm going to hold your slides for you, so you're going to tell me when to move on. That's correct, isn't it? Or have you got them?
I can try to share my screen
okay.
now. I know it says you disabled participant screen sharing, so I can't do that. That's fine, then go ahead.
Can you not? Sorry, I thought I had given you what you needed.
That's fine. It says I can't, but that's fine. No worries. Go ahead with my slide, and sorry, I'll ask for you to move them. So while the slides come on, hi everyone. So my name is Anne-Helene Sinha. I work for an organization called CAF Venturesome, which is part of Charities Aid Foundation, CAF. And I'm one of the investment manager there, but in particular, I'm in charge of the community-led housing fund. Yeah, next slide, please. So a little bit about CAF Venturesome. So CAF Venturesome is a team within Charities Aid Foundation. If you don't know CAF, it's actually one of the biggest charities in the UK, which is about encouraging philanthropic capital. So I guess it's quite important for you to remember that in the terms of we're aligned, as we are a charity ourselves, basically. And we were one of the first social investments funds set up in the UK in 2002. So we've made over 600 social investments, committed over 50 million to date. And another thing to remember, which is quite important, is that we are backed by philanthropic capital, which means our funders are either foundations and trusts, as well as private philanthropists, so high net worth individuals. And they lend us money, but we have to give it back, basically, after 5 or 10 years. So it's not granted to us. So hence why we have to charge, basically, interest, if you like, to cover our costs, pretty much. And we have 3 funds, our development fund, which is open to more established kind of charities, community businesses of any form. The CLH fund, which is quite specific, we'll discuss today, and also another fund, SESIS, which is for early stage entrepreneurs, kind of interest-free type loan. Next slide, please. So just to say that we've invested in community land trust, in particular, for over 10 years. We set up our first fund in 2008. So just to say that we understand community land trust and community-led housing really well. We've made lots of investments in this sector to date, and help obviously build, contributed to help build about 200 homes, I think probably more now, with over 460 in the pipeline. Yeah, you can go for the next slide. So the CLH fund, so as I said, we've done two funds before. This is our third fund we are launching. So for those who knew our previous fund, just to kind of give you an update on what this is about. So basically, this new fund, which we launched last year and which is open for 5 years. So it's very much an open-ended fund, if you'd like, for the next 5 years. We're now looking at supporting all forms of community-led housing, so not just community land trust. So if you're a housing co-op or a co-housing group or self-help build schemes, etc., we can support you, and we can do that all across the UK. A new feature of this fund as well is that we are able to provide grants alongside our loan up till basically start on site. So we can do that at planning stage, but also potentially at post-planning stage, as well as for land purchase, which I will detail in a minute. We've also established lots of new products. So basically, we had before a very kind of rigid type of product. It's either to get you to planning or to start on site. Now we've done a lot of research, and groups told us that basically they want to access more seamless funding from us, and we're here, pretty much remember us as we're here to fill the gaps which are not met by anyone else. So if there is no grant, or if you've had grants but you need more funding, then obviously we're there. If for instance you have some grant funding but it will be paid in arrears, so after you had to pay some invoices to architects, etc., again we can cover that gap, so provide you that working, what we say, working capital, to help you bridge the gap till grant funding kicks in. We can provide land at pre-planning stage, but we also know that once you secure planning, then there might be a gap again before you can start on site and secure funding from a bank like Triodos. So again, we can cover that gap. So we're very much here to kind of cover any of your funding needs, and we have no restriction in terms of tenure. So whether you want to do shared ownership or rentals, it doesn't matter to us. What we look at is that your scheme is at least 50% for affordable homes. So again, if you need to create open market homes to make the scheme financially viable and basically to cross-subsidize the affordable homes, again, we're okay with that, as long as your aim is to maximize affordability of the schemes, and we have no restriction on location either in terms of our priority for funding, but we have a greater focus on social impact in terms of looking at how affordable the homes are, kind of what is your definition of affordability, to what extent you're going to protect the affordability of the homes in the long term, to what extent you're kind of including environmental impact within your scheme, to what extent you're working with other schemes and maybe sharing the knowledge, etc. So we're looking at a wider range of impact, and the way we look at social impact is both to kind of, in our decisions, we can, if we think your scheme will have a very high impact, we might, we're more ready to take a financial risk, if you'd like, but also to make sure that we can, in the end, inform more the kind of national knowledge about community-led housing scheme, what they achieve, and contribute to kind of lobbying and campaigning for more funding for the sector. So it's kind of both for our own investment, but also to kind of contribute to the wider national voice around the social impact that community-led housing are having. Next slide, please. So this is very much an overview of the different products we offer. And as you'll see, we'll try to kind of cover a wide range of steps where you might be in. So we can't provide loan at group stage. So as I guess Andy highlighted, we're here to come when you are incorporated and you have a land in mind and have some form of agreement on that land. So you don't need to have a signed options agreement, but at least a heads of term guaranteeing that you have exclusivity. And they might not want to sign an options agreement with you if you can't evidence that you have the funding. And so we know that, so we're flexible, so we can offer you a loan pending obviously the options agreements, for instance, to be signed. So at site stage we can do pre-development loan up to 150K, and we can top that up with up to 50,000 additional grant. And what we say is, if planning permission is not secured and you decide not to appeal, so it's basically rejected, then we would write off the loan, as in you won't need to pay us back if you decide to drop that scheme. So we wouldn't put you in a situation where you're indebted because you looked at a site and it didn't work out, and then you can never raise any further debt, basically. So then it becomes effectively a full grant. As I said, we can also do kind of, once you have secure planning, we can do a kind of what is called a bridging facility. So let's say you're planning to raise community shares or you have some grant funding. which you have secured, but we will only be paid in arrear, then we can cover that basically. We can also now do land purchase, which is quite exciting, which is often, so you would have maybe an agreement with a landowner to buy a land, and you would have secure planning, but the bank is not, you're not in a position yet to secure funding for the land, and you probably want to buy it before the landowner changes his mind, because the land has now much more value, and you're worried about losing the site, or maybe the landowner just want to now sell and can't wait for the next steps to happen. So again, we're able to provide a loan at this stage, and we do it again fully unsecured loan, because we know that the bank will want to take security at build stage. So we don't take any charge or security on the land. And we can provide some grant as well alongside that. And then at build stage, this is where we would come alongside a bank like Triodos Bank, where we come as a junior lender. So we come behind the bank, because the bank, as Mark will explain, will be able to lend you to a certain level, but they will say, okay, that's as much we can do, and then maybe you'll have some grants, but you still have a gap. And again, we can fill basically that gap. So I'm not going to go into detail about the fees and interest at every stages, unless there are specific questions on that. But that's roughly the product we're offering. And we also have a facility for enabling hub, but less relevant for you guys. Next slide, please. So the application, the way it works is basically, it's not like a grant application, if you like. So it's not a form you filled and then you submit. It's actually more of a discussion. So we will have, you would call me and have some questions about what we're offering, and you want to discuss your scheme. So we will do that. I will ask you to kind of send some information, and I'll explain that in a minute. Then we would usually visit you and visit the board members and visit the site. At the moment, obviously, we do that virtually. So we're meeting with a couple of the board members and ask for photos of the site. And then we basically write the application on your behalf, which we then present to our investment committee. And our investment committee and grants committee, so we have two separate committees, and they meet monthly. So you basically can come at any time to us over the next 4 years now, for us to present. And then we'll make a decision that day, we'll communicate that decision, and then obviously we'll work with you on kind of the next step around the legals, etc. So in terms of the key requirements, obviously depending on what stage you are at, there are different requirements, but at the very kind of early stages, what we want to know is the kind of the land status and the agreement in place. So kind of what type of land it is. Do you have at least heads of term in place with the seller or the owner of the land? We want to look at the stakeholder support. So we would ask for a pre-application from the local authority, which we know are rarely very positive, but at least we want to see that they're not dead against the scheme from the outset. And we would want to see that how much community engagement you've done. So to make sure that the scheme you're planning to do reflects what the community wants and needs. So again, we don't have any preference in terms of tenure or of type of home, etc. But we want it to be matching what the community wants, basically. We need you to evidence the housing need. We want kind of an idea of, what type of homes you're going to do, how many homes, how affordable they will be. We want to see a draft allocation policy. I appreciate it's very early stages, but for us, it's very much to understand that, make sure that the homes will go to those who need it most, and that you'll prioritize those who are not able to access homes on the open market, basically. We're looking at the governance and the skill sets, and if within the board there is limited housing development experience, that's fine, but then are you supported by a hub or a technical advisor to kind of fill this skill set gap? And we would look at this stage as very much a budget, based on quote you would have for the pre-development phase and including for the development phase. So when we say budget, we want to kind of have a list of the costs, how much it will cost you, but also how much income where will the income come from, basically. So pre-development, we could cover 100%, to be honest, but obviously on the development phase, we want to know that you've thought about accessing a loan from a bank, how much would that be, or how much grant you'll be able to secure from Homes England. Without having firm commitment, we need to kind of have a sense that the scheme is financially viable. And then, yeah, obviously other sources of finance. And then at build stage, this is, we would need similar information, but we would need a much more detailed financial model, which I'm sure Mark will pick that on. And then, yeah, so sorry, that's a video which is on our website. So feel free to go and have a look. I know it's not very practical to play videos in Zoom. That can be quite confusing, but Cornwall CLT is one of our flagship clients. We've made over, I think, 10 loans to them over the years. And they talk about their schemes and the kind of what it is like, basically, to access funding from us. And then I wanted to talk as well about other sources of finance. So it's not just us. I mean, unfortunately, I know that the funding landscape has vastly reduced over the last year, unfortunately, for community-led housing fund. But we see at the very early stages that groups are able to get some form of grants from local authorities. Some have had kind of big lottery awards for whole grant funding. Community foundations as well can bring you a bit of grant funding, and obviously crowdfunding as well. Then at later stage, so Homes England, obviously a bit question mark on the community housing fund. We're still waiting. I feel every month someone tells me they're going to be an announcement this month, but obviously still waiting on that. But you can, yeah, get grant funding still from local authorities. And then community share issues is becoming increasingly popular as well, which again, Mark might be able to talk about, because Triodos has a platform for that. And Essex is another one, basically. And then at build stage, Homes England, obviously, but you'll have to obviously often partner with a RP or an IP. You'll have all the ethical banks, so Triodos being one of them. Others are Charity Bank, CAF Bank. I think Unity Trust is less involved now, as well as building society. So like Ecology Building Society, for instance, is very active in that space. And then you have social investors like us, junior lenders. So we are, I must say, the main one in the space, but we've been able to partner with others, like, for instance, Big Issue Invest, to kind of provide junior lending. AHP, sorry, it means Affordable Homes Program or Affordable Housing Program by Homes England. Yes, I think so. That's kind of an overview of other sources of finance, basically at various stages. I know the community-led home partnership website list and update this relatively regularly as well. So that's it from me. Obviously happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Anna-Lane. That was no doubt another whistle-stop tour through what's a really useful portfolio of options for people to hear about. Let me just stop that share so that we can see each other. Really useful to hear about the pre-development stuff and the way that it's about building a relationship. And what I think I'm hearing from you is that the idea of that relationship is that you can have a repeat visit, and that's what your case study would go into, is that this isn't about asking for one big bite of the apple. It's about building confidence and trust and knowing what you need right now and asking for it very clearly. And again, this sort of supports the idea that that Becky was asking about having the right information at the right moment, so that you're not guessing as too far into the future. Is that fair, Anne-Helene? Is that it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is very much a partnership relationship. So we're always happy to have a chat, basically, and we won't hold against you any questions you think might be stupid, or if you feel you're not ready enough, it doesn't matter, basically, because we're here to kind of signpost you as well. And we also here to provide you some advice. So I've advised sometimes on schemes where, for instance, they're really struggling to get a pre-app from the council. And I said, well, tell the council that I won't consider an application from you if you don't get that. In the end, I said I will still consider because I know you've been waiting for it for a year. But they did that, and then they got the letter within a week. So we can be, as I said, sometimes helpfully difficult in our request to actually say, well, you know, you to help unblock some situation, and including, you know, advising on some, you know, groups looking to kind of buy the sites without having planning permissions, for instance. For us, it's like, no, you shouldn't do that. Get the options agreement, condition the purchase of the site to planning, etc. So we can advise a little bit, obviously not the way that you are, but we can play a bit, sometimes some lever to kind of help you get be in the right negotiation position, whether it's with the council or whether it's with the landowner, etc.
That's really helpful. Really, it is really good to hear, because a lot of the conversations that we have about this is about building confidence and making sure things look really credible. And if organisations are moving forward with the support and strength of a funder behind them, then that makes a big difference, I think. So that's really useful.
Yeah, and sometimes we get people just asking us for in principle support, which we can do that. We can do an email in principle to say, yes, in principle, we would support a scheme doing that, which could be helpful with the landowner or the local authority.
Okay, just noticing that there's a question there from Rima. Is Andy busy typing an answer to it? Yes, he is. Okay. Does that answer your question, Rima? Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, no, I was meaning community land trust, as in the model where the community land trust own the land and somebody else owns the house on top of it.
Ah, that's the original concept, which is prevalent in America, which everybody wanted to copy over here in the UK when we all started about 20 years ago. And then we gradually found out that Homes England and such people weren't really very keen on that particular model. But the Americans would lease a piece of land to you and then let you cover the build cost. And then the resale value of your property was also restricted to local wage inflation.
Yeah,
it's been fantastic in terms of very level affordability over a long period of time.
Yeah. So my question was to Anne-Helene is, do the loans cover that type of model, or is it restricted to rental, shared ownership?
No, we can cover, whatever model works for the community, basically. So yes, we could. I mean, obviously, we want the scheme to be as much community-led as possible. So if you're just want to buy the land to then have a housing association build everything on it, then we'll look at that. But
no, it was more the CLT buying the land and then making it available to be built on by the community as affordable housing. And then, as Andy was saying, resale linked to local wages.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, for us, as long as the homes will be kind of affordable in perpetuity, and we don't have, the CLT doesn't have to own the homes, but they have to be stewarded by the community. So the fact that you own the land indeed might be enough. And if the community is involved in the design, etc., and then you'll have control on the affordability, that's enough for us. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Just very quickly, Shropshire Council have got a policy which is very close to that. So I'm sure it could be still a possibility.
Okay. Right, I'm going to keep moving us along because we've got one more presentation coming from Mark at Triodos. Triodos, very well known in this sector, but it's always, you know, as I said at the beginning, really great, I think, to see the bank in the flesh, as it were, and to be able to have a conversation and to hear from the horse's mouth what's going on. Sorry, I'm mixing all sorts of metaphors and not painting a very flattering picture there, Mark.
I know I'm grey and going a bit bald, but come on.
I'm really pleased that you're able to join us and contribute your presentation at this point. And then we will have as open a discussion as we can about all the things that people wanting to talk about in their particular situations for what will probably be 25 minutes after that, if that's okay. So away you go, Mark. But while Mark's talking, if people do have questions, please do use the chat function, and we'll try and make sure we get back to everything when we've finished listening. That's great. Mark, am I holding your slides, or are you doing it yourself?
You are. No, I'm not that techie, so it's definitely over to you.
How's that looking to everybody? Is that okay?
Yeah, looks good to me.
Good. Okay, away you go.
Okay. So yeah, there we go. Just so that's me. Mark Ogden, one of the lending managers at Triodos. My specialty, one of my specialties, is affordable housing and community led, and have been involved in it for about 10 years or so. If we can go to the next slide, just gives you a quick overview of Triodos, who we are, and I think a lot of people probably already know us, but been going since 1980. As you can see, we've got started in Holland and then sort of slowly spread out. Been operating in the UK. Actually, that slide's slightly wrong. It was 25 years last year, and we were due to have our 25th sort of anniversary celebrations right in the middle of lockdown, so that kind of killed that. Recently, we've become a wholly owned subsidiary of the Dutch group, so we are actually a UK bank now with a UK banking license, thanks to Brexit. I won't dwell on that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just to give you some context, really. So we've been lending to CLTs, either directly called CLTs or in a slightly different format, but effectively CLTs for over 10 years, actually. We currently have about 25 CLTs on our lending book, with about £13 million out to them. And that is about 70 to 75 residential units that have been generated. There's a number of projects actually going through sort of sanctioning, legal and awaiting drawdown, and that's about another 18 million. So the whole sector is really, really active at the moment. We could move on to the next slide. Okay, so this kind of just places where we are and what we do, and we've got sort of quite a unique sort of package, really, and we do work in conjunction with people like Anne Helene and some of the other lenders as well that Anne Helene mentioned. But we not only do lending, we also have another team, our corporate finance team, which I'll give more details on, but they can provide advice and modelling and actually find different funding packages for you, which may or may not include Triodos Bank. So a bit of an odd situation. We'll do development finance only. We'll do development and then long-term follow-on finance, so build it and keep it. We have a product on the long-term lending side of things which isn't offered elsewhere in the market to help during the sort of first 10 years when rental income can be relatively low, so helps with viability. We think we're pretty competitive on rates and fees. Obviously, all rates and fees, as with Anne Helene, are really judged against the perceived risk. So that can be loan to value or viability, or a combination of the two. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so development funding, we are looking for projects to fund, and we lend just for development. You don't need to have any sort of long-term lending requirement. In fact, I've got a project that's about to start drawing down in the next couple of weeks, if we can just get one last legal document sorted, which is a community land trust that is building houses, and then all of them are going to be sold on shared ownership. So it is just the 10 million, just the development funding that we're providing. As you can see, we max out at about 10 million per CLT. Bit of information there on the sort of parameters that we'll look at during the development phase. We say that the development loan can then be repaid from various sources. Could be some open market shared ownership or long-term loan conversion. To try and keep costs and things down and make the whole process as smooth as possible, we do have a sort of preferred suite of building documentation that you guys can use, and I'm happy to share that very early on. It just helps basically that we're using documentation that we know protects us and protects you, and it can speed up and reduce legal costs. The worst thing for us is to find a CLT that's been in negotiation with a contractor, they've signed up to a contract, and there's all sorts of issues with it, and you've almost got to renegotiate it, and that takes time and takes an awful lot of legal cost as well. Can we have the next slide? Okay, so long-term debt funding, again, this can be in conjunction with development, so it can be what's left to be funded over a long term after you've sold some of the properties, or all of the properties you built can be kept for long-term rental. And increasingly what we're seeing also is community land trusts buying properties that are being completed by a developer, and those developers can be housing associations who sometimes will build their own social housing and also affordable housing to be run by the CLT. Sometimes developers, to fulfill their Section 106 obligations, have to build and dispose of affordable housing before they can start to build their market housing and take their profit. So they will quite often sell a sort of a portfolio of properties at a discount to a CLT, so we can help fund those. Again, sort of maximum that will lend and loan to values. There's mention there, as I say, about the viability in the early stages, and what we can do is we can split the loan into two portions, up to a 50-50 split, half of it on interest only and half of it on capital and interest. But what that does for the first 10 years effectively is reduce down the overall payments, which makes the project viability stronger, because you're not having to cover all of the loan payment at the same time. Interest rates can be fixed up to 10 years, so that helps your planning. Also de-risks it from a funder's perspective, because we know that there's going to be no interest rate inflation because it's fixed for that period of time. Next slide. Okay, corporate finance. This is the other part of the bank that I mentioned, and we do work in conjunction with each other. There is a Chinese wall between us, so I do refer projects to my colleagues in corporate finance, and they can do various things. And this is, I think, probably where Andy was mentioning about getting assistance. They can provide financial modelling, which the likes of ourselves and Anne Helene would look at. And some of these models can become quite complex if you're building 30 or 40 properties. all the various inputs during the development phase and then the long-term phase. They will also act directly for you guys and be employed by you effectively to find the best possible funding package, which, as I say, may and may not be Triodos Bank debt funding. It could be one of our competitors, so as Anne-Helene mentioned, Charity Bank, Ecology Building Society, CAF themselves, Unity Trust, although as Anne-Helene mentioned, I don't really see them very often, and they can come up with the best solution for you, which, as I say, may be Triodos Bank, it may not. Does create some interesting conversations sometimes when I don't get the business, but there you go. And they are very good at holding your hands. A lot of their work, there are grants available to cover the fees, which can be very useful. So they are a very good resource to make use of. There are other people out there that will do similar things, and some of the CLT hubs can provide some of that assistance as well. Next slide. Yeah, I think that's about it really. So I try to keep it fairly short and sweet and then allow more time for questions. One thing I would say, sorry that Anne-Helene mentioned it, please, please, please do not be afraid to pick up the phone and talk to us, even at a very early stage. Much rather do that and sort of steer you in the right direction, and you go off a long way down the track to then find actually when you come to try and get funding, something's not right. So by all means, talk to us. I have conversations with people and then probably don't hear from them for 18, 24 months. And then they phone up and say, do you know, we spoke a couple of years ago? And it's like, no, not really. But, you know, so we're more than happy to do that, as Anne-Helene is as well. It just helps the whole process go along. And hope to get some of these projects through and provide affordable housing for people that need them.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was, again, really useful to hear and to get a better understanding of the difference between the two offers, and make sure that we can see that there's some complementarity and some difference, certainly a difference in scale, but also the support the corporate finance offer is really valuable. I think it's certainly worth knowing that sort of level of attention is available from Triodos.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing that makes life easier for a funder. And I know Anne-Helene's seen the models that my corporate finance colleagues use, and it's helped them on some of their decisions as well. So it does make life a lot easier when you are going to a funder, if you've got that kind of level of information available.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, so we are going to just sort of open up the floor to questions. They can be fairly general, or they can be more specific if you like. Perhaps just to get us started, we could just go back to Lorraine's question about indicative costs. I think there have been a couple of things chipped into the chat, but does anybody have anything they want to put in on that about indicative costs for, sorry Lorraine, I can't see the question now. Was it about retrofit?
It was about retrofit, but also about new build, because I think when I've talked to a number of groups, they've wanted to get a kind of a ballpark for their project. And so I'm just wondering what that looks like on individual units for new build, but also for retrofit. And I guess it varies across the area. I can see that it varies from place to place. Thanks.
Okay, Andy's got his hand up to leap to the rescue there.
Well, in the chat I said go and talk to a quantity surveyor, but of course the other thing which I nearly forgot is to say that local builders, you know, if you're looking at renovations or even new build, if you're just trying to get started with some figures, they can be very helpful.
But there's no, I mean, there's a kind of industry understanding, I guess, but you don't have standard figures that you start from, Andy, when you're advising groups in the first
No,
instance?
No, but you can use standard figures and they are available, but over the years I've just found it more reliable to actually try to go and talk to somebody who's actually dealing with these sorts of things on a day-to-day basis. And you'd start off, I mean, if you were speaking to a quantity surveyor, somebody who's got loads of projects on the go and can kind of say, well, okay, this equates to some other things that I'm working with, roughly these sorts of costs, just as a starting point. But you need to get into the specifics of a site. The more specific, the better, really. And
Yeah.
the better.
Yeah, fine, okay.
Yeah,
Mark,
I think sorry. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, I think costs are one of the most difficult things to pin down, and there's loads of things that can affect those costs. So there are kind of ballpark figures available, but as Andy said, it's site specific, and quite often some of the projects that I see, the land that community land trusts are being offered, and quite often that's by a local authority, it tends to be difficult land, so land that is difficult to be commercially viable for commercial development, which tends to add an extra layer of cost. And the other thing also to think carefully about is actually what it is you want to build. And I know that sounds a bit silly, but you can get, if you talk to a nice architect, and they'll design you this beautiful development that's all singing, all dancing, high eco spec, but actually when you come to try and cost it, you can't afford it, and there's always going to be a trade-off, unfortunately, between is it affordable housing you want to provide or not, because you're trying to do something that's this all singing, all dancing thing, and it needs to have this realism brought in all the time on what you're trying to build and what your ultimate goal is. And if it is to provide affordable housing, then kind of park everything else. If you can afford some of the other bits and pieces, great, it's icing on the cake, but just be careful.
The reason I asked the question is because I'm working with a project at the moment that's been told by government that the cost is too high per unit, and it's renovation of current terraces to passive house standard. So it's got additional costs in it. But I just thought if we'd started with the group and talked to a quantity surveyor, like Andy said, and got a bit of a concept of the sort of costs, and then you add passive house on top, you're starting with a bit more realism than going, hey, let's go for top spec, as you say, and then having to come down, which feels like a failure rather than building up. So that was helpful.
Can I just ask you, so the properties you're looking at, are they all standard sort of terrace houses? Is it very standardized? Okay, so there's a company called Energy Sprong, I think it is. It's a Dutch company who have a solution. Oh, you've been speaking to them, have you? Right, I'll shut up then. But I know they because everything's standardized, it reduces the cost. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Martin, were you wanting to chip in?
I was only thinking there's also can be costs, indicative costs from housing associations about the kinds of developments they use when they tend to go from their recent experience of the latest schemes for X square meters. And notwithstanding the comments rightly made about the cost of land and things like that, and that's very idiosyncratic, you can sometimes get an idea of what different housing associations practice it tends to be for different sizes of units.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's useful. Andy?
Yeah, just a few quick points. One thing is, I remember the what used to be the Homes and Communities Agency, now Homes England. Very good advice for Keswick Community Land Trust was that employ a quantity surveyor directly yourselves rather than having the quantity surveyor working with the architect. So the quantity surveyor is looking at things from your point of view and is actually providing some cost control. So it provides the right kind of framework for the architect. The other thing is land value. When you're doing all these site investigations, you should eventually arrive at what they call a residual land value. So if you start talking to a landowner, it's okay to quote sort of ballpark figures, and it may turn out that the residual land value as what you were originally discussing. But it's important to do some viability work first in order to find out what is actually payable in terms of land value, because you know, it may be that the project just can't stand more than a certain land value, or it could even be zero. And the other thing is, touching on Lorraine's point about passive house standards, there are now some examples where passive house is kind of supported by Homes England, and they are agreeing a slightly higher level of grant per unit. And that's on top of, there is also a kind of precedent that's established that community projects tend to get a bit higher grant per unit anyway from Homes England, so that can help sometimes.
Can I just, sorry, chip back in, one note of caution on passive house and high eco spec properties is typically there is a bit of a premium to build them, and unfortunately that's not reflected in the valuation that you will get. So there's no allowance for the lower running costs quite often that the tenants will have. So it's something to bear in mind. I know that there is work ongoing to try and almost put in a discounted cash flow element to valuations on high eco spec properties, but at the moment that's not there. So it will be valued as a bog standard property, but it can potentially cost more to build because of the extra eco equipment and work that needs to be done. So you might struggle, and that goes back to what I was saying about that tension between building to a certain specification against actually being able to provide the housing. Just need to bear in mind, and that's where it really comes to the fore in the valuation side of things.
Thank you very much, Mark, and everyone for chipping in there. Maddie, I see your comment in the chat, and I was just wondering if you wanted to say any more about that, and if I don't know if you want to comment on what's changed about your costs, or if it's just shifting sands. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, a little bit. Yes, keep going.
Right, that'd be better. Sorry, it must be my earphones. Well, because we're working in partnership with Eden Housing Association, so that their quantity surveyor have done all the costings. So they are obviously looking at the cheapest option, but I think it was just because of our site costs that the costs were looking to be probably more than the 125, but it's still kind of negotiable. And because some of the things that we wanted to put in the houses, especially like environmentally friendly heating systems and things, we're actually hopefully going to be able to get some more grant money for that, so that's offset from the costs. So yeah, but that was the ballpark figure that we were working on for the unit, plus the land purchase. So that's just to build the bit properties. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that is helpful. It's really useful to see a concrete example, if you'll forgive the pun, but it's, you know, it's useful to know that that's real and current, and that you know that you're still developing your thoughts, but they're pretty clear now, aren't they? So thank you. That's good. I'm just wondering if there was any other questions specifically for Anne-Helene or Mark in terms of the offer they're making, the bits they can support you with, what, you know, how we structure and discuss what present what we want to say to you. Martin, I can see you're waving.
I think I didn't quite hear what Anne-Helene said about preferred percentage of affordable housing in a scheme. It's the same question, I suppose, really to Triodos, if they particularly operate with a stated minimum percentage of affordable housing in the number of units.
Okay, so yeah, in terms of number of units, it needs to, for us to be at least 50% affordable. So if you're looking at 20 homes, at least 10 homes will need to be available on affordable basis. That could be rentals, that could be shared ownership, it doesn't matter. But yeah, we wouldn't want more than 50% of open market homes for sure. And then affordability, obviously, we like to see as affordable as possible. So closer to social rent than affordable rent, and, you know, a kind of a nice staircasing shared ownership. So starting at 40, 50% rather than 70, 80%.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much the same. There's no sort of hard and fast rules, but I think if it was 75% being sold as open market, then, you know, that probably wouldn't be one that we would want to get involved in. I think the cross subsidy side of things is brilliant if it works, but you know, there needs to be a good impact, social impact, for us to be involved in funding. So pretty much the same as Andy, although we don't have a specific figure. It's kind of, does that feel right? Yes. Does it feel right? No. And then kind of push back on drawing board really on that.
That's great, thank you. I hope that answers your question, Martin. Yeah, I think that was a thumb. Great stuff. I'm just wondering if, this is a question from me, Mark, about your the corporate finance modelling sort of stuff, and apologies if it's not your main area of expertise, as you say, it's a separate team and all that. But I'm curious as to the flexibility around, would they instigate a conversation about changes in, for instance, the number of properties on a site, the tenure of properties on a site, the number of bedrooms in each property? Is that the level at which they engage with the conversation and encourage, you know, the viability thinking to come through?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I can think of a particular project at the moment that actually I got sanctioned for back in August 2019. And it's interesting, we're talking about construction costs. And as the CLT, one of the members was actually a QS. So he produced costings for them to work in, which then fed into the whole of the financial model. And I think he thought that he was doing them a favour by having the lowest possible costs they could do. So we went all the way down the line and got approval for this. This is quite a few £1 million. It's quite a big project in London. And actually, when they then went out to the market to get tenders from contractors, the figures were out by not shy of £1 million. So as you can imagine, that kind of derailed it. And actually, it is now coming back. They've had to redesign the property and change planning and all sorts of bits and pieces to get the viability sorted out. But as part of that, even before that came to light, there was a lot of work done by my colleagues in corporate finance with the CLT around viability and the drivers and the changes that could be made. And that was, you know, could that be a 3-bed instead of a 2-bed? Do you really need whatever it might be? Gold taps in the bathrooms, not obviously, but you get the idea. So really, they really do kick the wheels to make sure that it actually works and is viable. So that's certainly a conversation they will be having. What do they call it? Value engineering. That's a phraseology I was trying to think of. So they do that, and it can then lead to some interesting discussions. And I know that particular CLT, quite a lot of the members, the original members of the CLT, resigned because they had their own view of how this development should have gone. And actually, at one stage, I know my colleague said, well, it's fine. The question is, do you want to have 25 affordable houses for your community, or do you want nothing? Because that's what it is. So if you stick to doing all these other bits and pieces in this particular design, you're not going to be able to do it. So it will end up with no houses whatsoever. So that's the kind of conversation that I know goes on in the background.
So Mark, if there was a group that couldn't find somebody to help them, could they just operate directly with yourselves and say,
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
The team, so the design team could liaise with yourselves and feed in all the figures. And the viability would be done by Triodos.
Yeah, I mean, they do different levels. It could just be the financial modelling, or it could be, you know, an even greater role. Obviously, the greater role costs more. And the way it works is, if I see a group, I'm talking to a group that clearly needs some assistance, then I can introduce them. There's no pressure for them to use the corporate finance guys. And I usually say, look, there are some people here that are kind of part of the bank, but they're separate and can help you with all this. There is a fee payable, but they can talk to you about getting grants to cover that. And then I refer them across and I step back, and that's where the Chinese wall comes in effectively. And I take no further part until something comes back. And, you know, even then, unless I've got specific instructions from the CLT that I can talk direct to corporate finance, I still go via the CLT with my questions and then pass across to corporate finance. So they are acting for the CLT, not really for the bank, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you for going into a bit more detail there. That's really helpful. I'm mindful of time. We're ticking along nicely. We haven't heard very much from some of you. I'm just opening it up and making sure that Helen or Becky or Rima or Nick or anybody. Does anybody want to chip in? Helen?
Just saying it's been very interesting and you know, very informative. It's been brilliant. Sorry about the background, my daughter's watching to me. No, myself, well, Becky is heading up a new Kendal community land trust. So when I'm new to this, I just thought we'd look for some land, buy the land, then look for builders to build it for us. And so there's all these other different ways of doing it are very interesting as well. No, but thank you for this. I didn't have any particular questions, but it's interesting to learn about finance as well, because we're thinking about that, obviously, how we're going to get it. And I think, you know, can we get grants from here and there and everywhere? But that's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. And Helene, are you wanting to chip in? Sorry, you've unmuted yourself.
No, I'm sorry. No. Apologies. I mean, just to say, yeah, affordability. I mean, remember, for me, the key thing is remember that what's your vision, and if it's about affordable homes, remember that. And the example that Mark said, I mean, sadly, it's not the only example I have in mind. I've got quite a few schemes over the last 2 years where they had everything ready to go. They had the finance ready. They were ready to start on site, but they did the value engineering. And in some cases, it was 2 million off their cost, and they have to go through the whole planning process again, which is heartbreaking for everyone, because it's not only time, it's also more money, which in the end will affect again the affordability of the homes. So really, yeah, have a good grasp on your cost, and remember what your vision is, because if it's about affordable homes, then, you know, stick to that, and yeah, maybe compromise on some elements, or maybe put a bit more homes on the side that you would like to, just to make sure that the scheme is viable, because there's nothing worse than having to restart the planning process.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Rima or Nick, either of you got anything to chip in at this last few minutes? No, you're happy? Okay. All right. Well, I'm perfectly comfortable to leave it at that, unless anybody's got anything. Oh, Lorraine, are you wanting to chip in?
I just had a thought about timescales, because certainly the people I've been talking to about community-led homes have been talking about it for 10 years, 12 years and longer. And when they get their costs, it sometimes, the percentage it goes up by is scary to everybody concerned. And if they've been talking to any funders and then it goes up, it just gets really, really difficult. Is there any way we can help them with an expectation, always add 20% or something? I know I saw somebody's figures earlier about 5 or 10%, but that doesn't seem anything like what I've seen in reality, what happens over the length of a project.
I think with Homes England, if it's just, you know, obviously you do get slow projects sometimes, and over a number of years, inflation will take its toll. I think Homes England would understand if it's inflation. I think the bigger problem is if there's another reason that costs have gone up, which is more unexpected.
I think that the other thing also is that it can also depend on the market. So if you've got a situation where in the market there's not many developments going on, then the contractors that are tendering would probably tender at a lower price. Whereas if they've got shed loads of work and they're probably thinking, oh God, it's a difficult site. It's trying to work with a load of loonies who have got together. Do we really trust them? We'll ramp up the price because actually we don't want to do it. So there's other things as well. And sorry, that's not my view of you guys, by the way. But you do see it happening that actually the contractors have got an awful lot of work already on and they don't really want it. So that can really impact sometimes on costs. So that's kind of outside your control, and there can be completely unforeseen things. And I think the one that Anne Helene was mentioning, was that one down in Devon that you were thinking about, Anne Helene, with the costs? No. Oh, anyway, there was one that I was a similar sort of situation to the London one. We were all set to go, and they went out to get tender, but they also discovered the council at the last minute chucked in that they needed to connect to the main sewer in a much bigger way than they were originally planning, and that added another couple of £100,000 to their costs because they had to dig the road up and etc. etc. So that was a bit of a curveball. So yeah, all sorts of things can happen, unfortunately.
Okay, right. I think it might be time for us to do the obligatory Zoom wave goodbye. And but before we do, I just want to say thank you very much indeed, all of you, for taking an hour and a half to be with us this evening and to for taking part. It's enormously generous of you to bring your selves and your stories along, and thank you to Andy and Mark and Anne Helene for their really useful and encouraging input. It's great to know that there are so many people out there really willing to help, wanting this to work. So please, any of you who are involved in groups and trying to find a way forward, please keep in touch with us and make sure that we can help with everything that your next steps and so on. It's all about making friends before you need them to some extent, and keeping talking to people and building those trusting relationships. So thank you again, and I'm going to say that's all for now. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you all.